I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Amanda Wilson. I'm 60 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will forever change how you look at your own family. Just 3 days ago, my son Daniel and his wife Harper pushed my husband Frank and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay there, broken and bleeding, I heard Frank's desperate whisper, "Amanda, don't move. Play dead." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was when Frank revealed a terrible truth our son had kept hidden for 25 years. For 4 decades, Frank and I built what we believed was the perfect family. We woke up every morning in our little suburban home where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with birdsong. I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school and came home each afternoon with stories about my young students. Frank had his carpentry shop where he created beautiful furniture. His hands, rough yet gentle, could transform simple wood into art. We had 2 sons, Andrew, our firstborn, and Daniel, 5 years younger. Andrew was the soul of our house, always laughing, always helping his father in the shop, always protecting me from worry. Daniel was different, more reserved, but I loved him with the same intensity. As a mother, you never play favorites, or at least that's what I told myself. On Sundays after church, we gathered around our oak dining table, which Frank had carved himself. Andrew would share his plans to study engineering, while Daniel would remain silent, just picking at his food. I noticed the shadow that crossed Daniel's face whenever anyone praised his brother, but I dismissed it as normal sibling rivalry. Life was simple but beautiful. In the evenings, Frank and I would walk the trail around our small town, talking about our dreams, how we'd watch our grandchildren grow, how we'd grow old together in that very house. I never imagined those walks were training for the one that would almost kill me. On weekends, I'd host family gatherings where my sisters, Betty and Joan, would come with their husbands and children. The house would fill with laughter and children running everywhere. Frank was my perfect partner. After 40 years of marriage, he still brought me wildflowers he'd pick on his way home. He helped me grade my students' tests, and I held pieces of wood for him while he worked in his shop. We were a team, an unbreakable unit, or so I thought. At night, we'd sit on the porch watching the stars, planning our future. We talked about traveling when we retired, seeing the ocean for the first time, building a smaller house once our kids started their own families. But perfect happiness, as I would discover years later, often hides the deepest tragedies. When Andrew turned 20, something changed in our family. He began to argue with Daniel about things I didn't understand. I'd hear them whispering in the hallway, falling silent when I appeared. Frank told me it was just brotherly stuff and would pass. I wanted to believe him because I needed to believe our family was still perfect. But I couldn't ignore the tension that filled our home whenever Andrew and Daniel were in the same room. Andrew would look at his brother with suspicion, while Daniel's eyes held something I couldn't quite name: resentment, perhaps, or fear. "Mom," Andrew said to me one evening while helping with the dishes, "have you noticed anything strange about the bank statements lately?" "What do you mean?" I asked, hands deep in soapy water. He hesitated. "Nothing. Forget I mentioned it. I should have pressed harder. I should have demanded answers. But sometimes, a mother's heart prefers comfort over truth." One night in October, exactly 25 years ago, Andrew didn't come home for dinner. We waited until 11, then midnight, then 1:00 a.m. Daniel was in his room supposedly studying, but I noticed something strange in his eyes whenever I asked about his brother. Frank went out to search with our neighbors. They checked every corner of town, every trail, every place Andrew frequented. My stomach twisted with each passing hour. I called Andrew's friends, his girlfriend, even the local hospital. No one had seen him. I paced the kitchen floor until my legs ached, jumping at every sound, hoping it was Andrew's key in the door. Daniel remained in his room, emerging only when I called him for updates. His face was blank, emotionless in a way that should have alarmed me. "He's probably just out with friends." "Mom," Daniel said flatly, "you know how he loses track of time?" But Andrew wasn't like that. He was responsible, considerate. He always called if he'd be late. At dawn, they found his body at the bottom of the river gorge. The police said it was an accident, that he had probably stumbled in the dark. I never questioned that version because I couldn't imagine that the truth was far more horrible. The call came at 5:17 a.m. I remember staring at the kitchen clock as Frank answered the phone, watching his face crumple. He said nothing, just handed me the receiver. Sheriff Thompson's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm so sorry. We found Andrew. There's been an accident." My legs gave out. I slid to the floor, still clutching the phone. Frank knelt beside me, his strong arms holding me as my world collapsed. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What happened?" he asked, his voice oddly calm. "Your brother," Frank managed to say, his voice breaking. "He fell from the ridge at Carver's Gorge." Daniel nodded slowly, turned, and walked back to his room. No tears, no cry of anguish, just a nod. At the time, I attributed it to shock. Now, the memory of his reaction sends shivers down my spine. Andrew's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore my only black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral. Daniel was strangely composed for someone who had just lost his older brother. While I cried until I had no tears left, he remained silent with an expression that now, knowing what I know, terrifies me. Frank never left my side that day, holding me up when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort that I now know tasted bitter in his mouth. His eyes were hollow, haunted by something beyond grief, but I was too consumed by my own pain to notice. After the funeral, our home felt like a museum of lost happiness. Andrew's room remained untouched, his engineering textbooks stacked on the desk, his baseball trophies gleaming on the shelf, his bed made with hospital corners just as he'd left it that morning. I'd stand in the doorway for hours, unable to enter, unable to walk away. Frank retreated to his workshop, spending more time there than ever before. The sound of his saw cutting through wood became the soundtrack to our grief. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear crashes and banging, Frank destroying what he'd spent hours creating. Only Daniel seemed to adjust quickly. He returned to college 2 weeks after the funeral, citing important exams and projects. Andrew wouldn't want me to fall behind, he explained with a logic that seemed callous at the time. In the months that followed, I sleepwalked through life. I took a leave of absence from teaching, unable to face my students' innocent questions about my absence. Some days, I couldn't find the energy to leave our bedroom. Frank would bring me meals on a tray, sitting silently beside me as I pushed the food around the plate. "He's gone, Mandy," Frank would whisper, using his pet name for me. "Our boy is gone." What he didn't say, what he wouldn't tell me for 25 more years, was that our other boy had taken him from us. After Andrew's death, Daniel changed completely. He became more attentive, more loving, as if trying to make up for something. He helped me with chores, accompanied his father to the workshop, and brought me things when he saw I was sad. I thought it was his way of dealing with grief, of filling the void Andrew had left. How naive I was. What he was really doing was building a perfect mask to hide the monster inside. The years passed, and the wound never fully healed, but we learned to live with it. I returned to teaching after 6 months, finding solace in my students' laughter. Frank continued his carpentry, though his pieces took on a darker tone, more angular, less inviting. We rarely spoke of Andrew, not because we'd forgotten him, but because remembering hurt too much. Daniel graduated from college with a business degree and, to our surprise, showed interest in carpentry. He apprenticed with Frank, learning the trade his father had intended to pass down to Andrew. "He has a natural talent," Frank admitted one evening, his voice tight. "His joints are perfect." I was pleased that father and son had found common ground, even as I noticed the strain in Frank's voice whenever he praised Daniel's work. At the time, I attributed it to the painful reminder of Andrew, who'd spent countless hours in the workshop before college. I didn't recognize it as the strain of a man forced to mentor his firstborn's killer. When Daniel was 28, he met Harper Lewis at a craft fair where he was selling pieces from the family business. She was elegant, sophisticated, and worked in marketing for a furniture chain. Within a year, they were engaged. "She's perfect for him, isn't she?" I said to Frank as we watched them dance at their engagement party. Frank nodded, a tight smile on his face. "She certainly knows what she wants. Harper integrated herself into our family with remarkable efficiency. She called me Mom and brought me expensive teas when she visited. She discussed business strategies with Frank, offering to help market Wilson-crafted furniture to a broader audience. On the surface, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, but there was something calculating in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Daniel and Harper married in a lavish ceremony that seemed at odds with our family's modest lifestyle. Her parents, wealthy real estate developers from the next town, spared no expense. I felt out of place in my department store dress among Harper's friends in designer gowns. "Don't worry about it, Mom," Daniel assured me when I expressed concern about the cost. "Harper's parents are handling everything. Just enjoy the day." 2 years later, they gave us our first grandchild, a boy they named Ethan, holding him in my arms. I felt a healing I hadn't thought possible. When their daughter Lily was born 3 years after that, our family felt complete again. Daniel opened his own workshop, separate from Frank's but using the Wilson name. Harper created a sleek website and social media presence. Business boomed. They built a house in an upscale neighborhood, drove luxury cars, and took expensive vacations. Daniel explained it as smart investments in Harper's business acumen, and we were happy for their success. Every Sunday, they'd bring the children for dinner. Harper would help me in the kitchen while Daniel and Frank took the kids to the workshop. These moments of domestic harmony were precious to me, proof that life could be good again after tragedy. "You've raised a wonderful son," Harper told me once as we prepared dinner. "He's so generous, so dedicated to family." I beamed with pride, not recognizing the irony in her words. The son I'd raised was neither wonderful nor dedicated to family. He was a pretender, a wolf in sheep's clothing, biding his time. For 20 years, we lived in this comfortable illusion. Frank and I retired me from teaching, him from active woodworking, though he still puttered in his shop for pleasure. We lived frugally on our pensions and savings, content with our modest home and simple pleasures. Then came the day that would expose the first crack in the facade Daniel had so carefully constructed. 6 months ago, as Frank and I approached our 60th birthdays, Daniel suggested we update our will. "Mom, Dad, you're both 60 years old now," he said during Sunday dinner. "It's important to have everything in order." Harper nodded beside him, stroking my hand with fingers that would later push me to my death. "We love you both so much, and we want to make sure you're protected," she added in her sweet voice. How foolish I was to interpret those words as genuine love. The lawyer, an older man named George Roberts, whom we had known for years, explained our options. We could put everything in a trust, divide the inheritance among Daniel's children, or make a traditional will. Daniel insisted on naming him and Harper as our sole heirs, arguing they would handle the equitable distribution to the grandchildren. "Besides," he said, "you're going to need us when you're older. It's better for us to have access to the resources to take care of you properly." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but Frank seemed convinced. My husband, who had always been more trusting than me, accepted the proposal without much resistance. I had my doubts, especially since I remembered how Andrew had always talked about helping us financially when we got older. My oldest son had plans, dreams of taking care of us when the time came. But Andrew was gone, and Daniel was our only surviving child. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Harper was wearing a pretty green dress and gave me a big hug afterward. "Now we're officially a united family forever," she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me a chill, though I didn't understand why. That night, as I made dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. Frank was unusually quiet, staring out the kitchen window at his workshop. "Frank," I said hesitantly, "do you think we did the right thing today?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "It's practical," he finally replied. "Daniel will make sure everything's handled properly." But there was doubt in his voice, a hesitation that I should have pursued further. The following weeks were strange. Daniel and Harper started visiting us more often, but their visits had a different feel. They no longer came just to spend time with family. They always had suggestions about how we should improve the house, what investments we should make, or what life insurance policies we should get. Mom, you should think about selling this big house and moving somewhere smaller, Harper said while examining our furniture with calculating eyes. We could help you find a comfortable apartment in town. But I loved our home. Every corner held a memory. Every room told a story of our 40 years of marriage. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family. The workshop where Frank created his masterpieces. The yard where our children and grandchildren had played. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else. When I told them this, I saw a flicker of irritation in Daniel's eyes that chilled me to the bone. Mom, you're being irrational, he said in a tone he had never used with me before. This house is too big for two people your age. If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we won't be able to help you in time. Harper nodded vigorously. Besides, the upkeep must cost a fortune. It would be much smarter to sell now while the housing market is high and move to something more appropriate for your age. Frank began to consider their arguments. My husband, who had always been practical, started talking about the logic behind their suggestions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind all this pressure. One night, after another of these tense conversations, I asked Frank if he didn't think it was strange that Daniel was suddenly so interested in our financial affairs. Amanda, he just cares about us, he replied while brushing his teeth. Maybe we should consider his suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be. But I saw something in my husband's eyes, a shadow of doubt he didn't want to acknowledge. Now I know that Frank already had his suspicions that he had started to connect dots I didn't even know existed. One afternoon, while Daniel and Harper were visiting, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I had gone upstairs to get a photo album they'd asked to see, but stopped on the stairs when I heard my name. Amanda is being stubborn about the house, Harper was saying, her voice low but intense. We need that money. Daniel, the business can't take another quarter like the last one. I know, Daniel replied, but pushing too hard will just make her suspicious. We need to be patient. We don't have time to be patient, Harper hissed. The bank is breathing down our necks. Your parents are sitting on almost $200,000 between this house and their savings. If we don't figure something out soon... I must have made a sound, because they suddenly fell silent. When I entered the kitchen a moment later, they were smiling as if nothing had happened. Found the album, Mom? Daniel asked, his voice perfectly normal. Yes, I said, my hands trembling slightly as I placed it on the table. Here are the pictures from your childhood you wanted to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Frank's breathing beside me, trying to understand why I felt so uneasy. The conversation I'd overheard played in my mind on repeat. Their business was failing. They needed our money. The friendly suggestions about selling our home suddenly took on a sinister tone. The next day, I decided to call my sister Betty for advice. Betty had always been sharper than me, more suspicious of people's intentions. When I told her about Daniel's pressure and what I'd overheard, she was silent for a long moment. Amanda, she finally said, doesn't it seem strange to you that Daniel is so anxious to control your money, I mean? He has his own business. He's always acted like he's doing well financially. Why would he need so much control over your finances? Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Daniel had always portrayed himself as successful, independent. Yet now, he seemed desperate for access to our modest savings. What should I do? I asked her. Don't sign anything else, Betty advised firmly. And maybe look into their business. Public records can tell you a lot. That afternoon, while Frank was in his workshop, I used our old desktop computer to search for information about Wilson Crafted Furniture. Inky, what I found shocked me. There were tax liens, lawsuits from suppliers claiming non-payment, and a pending bankruptcy filing. The business that Daniel had always described as thriving was in fact collapsing. I printed the documents with shaking hands, my mind reeling. Why had Daniel lied to us? Why hadn't he simply asked for help if they were in trouble when Frank came in for dinner? I showed him what I'd found. I think we need to talk to Daniel, I said. If they're in financial trouble, we can help them within reason. But all this pressure about the house and the will, it doesn't feel right. Frank sat heavily at the kitchen table, The same table where we had shared thousands of family meals. He stared at the documents, his face pale. "Mandy," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you 25 years ago." My heart began to pound so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. Frank's words hit me like a lightning bolt. "What about Andrew's death?" I asked with a trembling voice. My husband sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. Frank ran his hands over his face as if trying to erase the memories that had tormented him for 25 years. "The night Andrew died," he began in a broken voice. "Daniel wasn't in his room studying like he told us. I saw him leave the house around 8 hours. I followed him because something about his attitude worried me. He'd been very strange those days. More aggressive, more resentful." Frank paused, looking at his hands as if the terrible truth he had kept for so long was written on them. I stood frozen, unable to move, barely able to breathe. "I saw them arguing by the gorge. Amanda. I heard them screaming horrible things at each other." My world began to spin. "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, even though part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. Frank looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes, tears he hadn't even shed at our oldest son's funeral. "About the inheritance. Daniel was furious because Andrew was the oldest, because according to family traditions, he would inherit most of our assets. But there was something more, something about money that Andrew had found." "What money?" I asked, feeling the ground vanish beneath my feet. Frank sighed deeply before continuing. 3 days before he died, Andrew came to talk to me in the workshop. He had discovered that Daniel had been stealing money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, but then larger sums. Andrew had proof. He'd been investigating for months. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. My youngest son, the one who had been so attentive after Andrew's death, the one who helped and cared for us, had been stealing from us even before his brother died. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I accused Frank, feeling the betrayal multiply. "Because when I got to the gorge that night, it was already too late," he replied in a choked voice. "I saw Daniel standing next to Andrew's body. Our youngest son was trembling, crying, and repeating over and over, 'It was an accident. It was an accident.'" He looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help him. Tears ran down my cheeks uncontrollably. "But you believed him," I murmured. Even though I already knew the answer, Frank nodded slowly with an expression of guilt that had gnawed at him for decades. "He was my son, Amanda. My youngest son was asking for my help, and Andrew was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by destroying the other. I thought it was really an accident, that Daniel had learned his lesson, that he would become a better man after this." "And the stolen money?" I asked, needing to know every detail of this nightmare. "Daniel promised he would pay it back little by little, that he had taken the money to invest in a business that had gone wrong. He swore he would never do something like that again. And I believed him. Amanda, God forgive me, but I believed him because I needed to believe my son wasn't a killer." I got up from the table, stumbling, holding onto the wall so I wouldn't fall. Everything I had believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 25 years of my life, was a lie. "Did he pay the money back?" I asked, although I already knew the answer from the look on Frank's face. "Never," he replied. In fact, he kept stealing small amounts that I pretended not to notice because confronting him would mean admitting I had covered up a murder. I became his accomplice. Amanda. Every time I stayed silent. Every time I pretended not to see the bank accounts dwindle. I became more of his accomplice. The horrible reality began to take shape in my mind. "That's why he's so interested in controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because he cares about us. It's because he wants to finish what he started 25 years ago." Frank nodded gravely. "And there's something else, Amanda. Something I just discovered a few weeks ago." "What else could there be?" I asked, feeling like my heart couldn't take any more revelations. Frank went to his desk and pulled out some papers he had been hiding under other documents. I've been discreetly investigating Daniel's finances. His carpentry business isn't doing as well as he wants us to believe. In fact, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $100,000 to several banks and suppliers. The papers trembled in my hands as I read the numbers. Daniel wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure who had been living on lies and stolen money for decades. "Does Harper know all this?" I asked, remembering her sweet smile and loving hugs. "I'm sure she does," Frank replied. "I've noticed how she directs the conversations when they talk about our money, how she asks specific questions about our savings, the value of the house, our life insurance policies. They aren't innocent questions. Amanda, they are questions from someone calculating exactly how much our deaths are worth." That sentence chilled me to the bone. "Our deaths," I repeated in a whisper. It was the first time I had considered that Daniel might want to cause us physical harm. Until that moment, I thought he just wanted to rob or cheat us. But if he had killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason Frank? I said, grabbing his hands. "We have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Andrew and about what's happening now." But my husband shook his head with a look of hopelessness that broke my heart. "With what evidence? Amanda, I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to jail, too. And besides, who's going to believe an old man who has been keeping this secret for 25 years? He was right, and the realization filled me with despair. Do we just wait for him to kill us like he killed Andrew? "We're going to be very careful," Frank said, trying to sound more confident than he really was. "We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence." But his words were interrupted by the sound of the phone. It was Daniel. "Hi, Mom," he said with that sweet voice that now sounded sinister to me. "Harper and I were thinking, and we believe it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountains you've always talked about next weekend? We could go on a family hike, take pictures, and have a perfect day together." My blood turned to ice. I looked at Frank, who had heard the conversation and had the same look of terror on his face. "That's a very sweet idea, son," I managed to reply in a trembling voice. "But let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow." After hanging up, Frank and I looked at each other in silence, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own execution. "The mountains," I murmured. "He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident." Frank nodded gravely. "Just like he did with Andrew at the gorge." That night, we didn't sleep a minute, holding each other in our bed, planning how we could save ourselves from our own son. The next few days were a nightmare of terror and pretense. Frank and I had to act as if nothing had happened when Daniel and Harper came to visit, smiling when they talked about the mountain trip, nodding when they excitedly told us about spending time with family. But inside, every fiber of my being screamed with fear. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my oldest son's murderer. And now he was planning to do the same to his father and me. "Mom, we've already booked the cabin," Harper said on Thursday when they dropped by unannounced. "It's going to be such a special weekend. The perfect way to celebrate 40 years of marriage." I watched her arrange wildflowers in a vase she'd brought a little anniversary gift, wondering how someone so elegant, so seemingly kind, could be involved in planning murder. Had Daniel told her the truth about Andrew? Was she capable of pushing an elderly woman to her death for money? "The kids are so excited," she continued, oblivious to my scrutiny. "Ethan keeps talking about fishing in the mountain stream with Grandpa." "That sounds lovely," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I expected. "Frank has always wanted to teach him how to fish." Frank entered from his workshop, sawdust clinging to his shirt. He'd aged a decade in the few days since our conversation about Andrew. Deep lines etched his face, and his shoulders hunched as if carrying a physical weight. "Daniel," he said, forcing a smile, "I was just looking at those blueprints you brought over. The design for the new dining set is impressive." Daniel beamed at the praise, and I felt sick watching him absorb his father's approval he'd craved his entire life, even as he plotted to kill us both. "Thanks, Dad. I learned from the best." His eyes, so like Andrew's, held none of his brother's warmth, How had I never noticed the coldness there after they left? Frank and I sat in our living room, trembling not just from fear, but from the strain of maintaining our facade. "We can't go," I said, clutching his hands. "We just can't. We'll make up some excuse." "If we don't go," Frank replied gravely, "they'll find another way. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're going to try to do." His words had a terrible logic that didn't comfort me at all. "So what do you suggest?" Frank was thoughtful for a few minutes before answering. "We're going to go, but we're going to be prepared. I'm going to hide my cell phone and set it to record everything. If we survive, we'll have evidence. And if we don't," his voice broke, "at least someone will know the truth." That night, I sat at our kitchen table writing a letter to my sister Betty, explaining everything Frank had told me about Andrew's death and our suspicions about Daniel's current plans. I sealed it in an envelope and tucked it inside my well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a book Daniel would never touch, and placed it back on the shelf. "What if no one finds it?" I asked Frank as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "I made arrangements," he replied, his voice hollow. "I called George Roberts today, told him we were going hiking this weekend and wanted to update a few things in our will. I mentioned that if anything happened to us, Betty should be notified immediately and given full access to our house and personal effects. Did he suspect anything?" "I don't think so. I just said we're getting older and wanted to be cautious before a trip into the mountains." I turned to face him in the darkness, tracing the familiar lines of his face with my fingertips. In the soft moonlight filtering through our curtains, he looked young again, the handsome carpenter I'd fallen in love with at 19. "Frank," I whispered, "do you think we should just pack a bag and drive away tonight?" He pulled me closer, his arms still strong despite his 60 years. "And go where? Mandy, leave our home. Our memories run like criminals when we've done nothing wrong." He sighed deeply. "Besides, they'd find us eventually. Daniel knows all our friends, all the places we might go." He was right, of course. There was nowhere to hide. And part of me, the part that had been a teacher for 30 years, couldn't bear the thought of running from my own child, no matter what he'd done. "Then we fight," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "We go to the mountains, but we fight back." I felt Frank nod in the darkness. "We fight," he agreed. "For Andrew, for ourselves, and for the truth." On Friday evening, we began packing for the trip that might be our last. Frank pulled our ancient hiking boots from the back of the closet, checking the laces, cleaning off the dust. "Do you remember when we bought these?" he asked, a sad smile playing on his lips. "That camping trip when the boys were young." I nodded, memories flooding back. Andrew had been 10, Daniel just 5. We'd pitched a tent by Silver Lake, caught fish for dinner, and told ghost stories around the campfire. Andrew had been brave, venturing into the woods with his father to gather firewood. Daniel had clung to me, afraid of the shadows between the trees. "Andrew protected him from the forest monsters," I said softly, recalling how our oldest son had fashioned a monster repellent from pine cones and leaves to make his little brother feel safe. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, the protected becoming the predator. Frank set the boots aside and pulled out his Swiss Army knife, checking each tool methodically. He slipped it into his pocket without comment. Next came a small first aid kit, which he supplemented with extra bandages and antiseptic. "Just in case," he murmured, though we both knew what kind of injuries he was anticipating. I packed light a change of clothes, our medications, a flashlight with fresh batteries. In the side pocket of my backpack, I hid a small can of pepper spray I'd bought years ago when I worked late at the school. I'd never imagined I might use it against my own son. As I zipped the bag closed, the phone rang. It was Harper. "Amanda, I'm just checking in about tomorrow," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "We'll pick you up around 8, if that works. The weather's supposed to be perfect clear skies, not too hot. Perfect weather for a murder," I thought bitterly. "8 sounds fine, dear. Should we bring lunch?" "Don't worry about a thing," Harper replied. "I've got it all planned. Sandwiches, fruit, cookies for the kids, and champagne, of course, to celebrate your anniversary. How thoughtful of her to bring champagne to toast our deaths. That's very kind, I said, amazed at how normal I sounded. Frank and I are looking forward to it. The lie felt like acid on my tongue. After hanging up, I went to find Frank in his workshop. He was standing at his workbench, staring at a photograph in a simple wooden frame Andrew at 18. Cap and gown, his future bright before him. He would have been 45 this year, Frank said without turning around. Probably married, maybe children of his own. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the slight tremor there. I keep thinking about his last day, I said. How ordinary it was. I made pancakes for breakfast. He was rushing out to meet friends, but he stopped to kiss my cheek. Love you, Mom, he said. Just like that, the last words I ever heard from him. Frank turned, embracing me as the tears came, tears we'd both held back for too long, afraid that once we started crying, we might never stop. I failed him, Frank whispered into my hair. I should have gone to the police that night, should have made Daniel face the consequences. Maybe then. We both failed him, I said, and we failed Daniel too, in different ways. The thought surprised me, but I knew it was true. By keeping Andrew's murder secret, Frank had denied Daniel the chance to face his crime, to seek redemption, and I had been blind to the darkness in my younger son, seeing only what I wanted to see. We stood there, holding each other amid the sawdust and tools, grieving not just for Andrew, but for the family we'd thought we had, the family that had never really existed. When we finally separated, Frank's expression had changed. The grief remained, but determination had taken hold as well. There's something I haven't told you, he said, moving to a cabinet in the corner of the workshop. He unlocked it with a key from his pocket and pulled out a thick file folder. I've been gathering information on Daniel and Harper for months. I stared at him in shock as he spread the contents on his workbench. Financial statements, property records, loan applications, a paper trail of deceit spanning years. How did you get all this? Some of it is public record. Some came from George Roberts. He's been our lawyer for 30 years. And he was concerned about how aggressively Daniel was pushing for control of our assets. And some, he hesitated. Some came from Andrew's things. He was investigating Daniel before he died. I found his notes hidden in an old toolbox. I leafed through the documents, my teacher's mind automatically organizing and connecting the information. What emerged was a pattern more disturbing than I'd imagined. They've been planning this for years, I said in disbelief. Look at these life insurance policies they took out on us, both naming Daniel as the sole beneficiary. Frank nodded grimly. And look at this. He pointed to a bank statement from 6 months ago. They're completely broke. The business is underwater. Their house is mortgaged to the hilt, and they've maxed out 5 credit cards. But they seem so successful, I said, thinking of their beautiful home, Harper's designer clothes, the expensive private school the children attended. It's all smoke and mirrors, Frank replied. They've been living beyond their means for years, borrowing from one source to pay another. Now it's all collapsing. They need cash, and they need it fast. Our deaths would solve their problems, I murmured, the reality of our situation sinking in deeper. The life insurance, the house, our savings. It would be enough to clear their debts and start over. Exactly. Frank gathered the documents, returning them to the file. And Daniel has experience making murder look like an accident. A chill ran through me despite the warm evening. Do you think Harper knows about Andrew? I mean, Frank considered the question. I don't know, but she's certainly willing to kill us for money. So does it really matter? He was right. Whether Harper knew about Andrew's murder or not, she was complicit in planning ours. The sweet, sophisticated woman who called me Mom was in reality calculating the profit from my death. As we continued preparing for the trip, I made one last desperate attempt at normalcy, baking oatmeal cookies for the grandchildren. The familiar routine measuring flour, creaming butter and sugar temporarily soothed my frayed nerves. I imagined Ethan's face lighting up when I handed him the container. Lily asking for, "Just one more, please, Grandma." Would I ever see those faces again after tomorrow? Would I ever hear Lily's giggle or feel Ethan's small hand in mine? The thought of my grandchildren brought a new wave of anguish. What would happen to them if our suspicions were correct? If their parents were convicted of murder, they would lose everything: parents, grandparents, home, security. "Frank," I called, the realization striking me with force. "The children, if something happens to us, and Daniel and Harper are responsible, the children will be orphans." Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face ashen. I didn't think of that. We stood in silence, the weight of this new concern pressing down on us. Finally, Frank spoke. "Betty would take them," he said. "She and Jim are good people. They'd make sure Ethan and Lily were loved and cared for." I nodded, clinging to this small comfort. Betty and Jim had raised 3 wonderful children of their own. They would be kind to our grandchildren, would tell them stories about their grandparents, would make sure they knew they were loved. As night fell, Frank and I sat on our porch swing, watching the stars emerge one by one. The same stars we'd gazed at with Andrew and Daniel when they were boys, naming constellations, making wishes on shooting stars. "Do you remember what Andrew always wished for?" I asked. Frank smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in days. To go to space, every shooting star, every birthday candle, always the same wish. "He would have made it too," I said. "He was so determined." We swung gently in the darkness, cherishing these memories, stealing these moments of peace before the storm. "If something happens tomorrow," Frank said quietly, "if we don't make it back." "I know," I interrupted, squeezing his hand. "I love you too, for 40 years and beyond." We went to bed early, though neither of us expected to sleep. Frank held me close, his heartbeat steady against my back. I memorized the feeling of his arms around me, the scent of sawdust and aftershave that had been the backdrop of my life for 4 decades. Tomorrow, we would face our son, the son who had murdered his brother, who had stolen from us for years, who now planned to kill us both for money. We would face him not just with fear, but with knowledge, with evidence, and with the determination to survive. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, my last thought was of Andrew, his bright smile, his kind eyes, his protective nature. If there was any justice in this world, his spirit would be with us tomorrow. We would need all the help we could get. The doorbell rang at precisely 8 o'clock. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door with what I hoped was a convincing smile. "Good morning," Harper chirped, looking fresh and elegant in expensive hiking gear that had probably never seen a trail. Ready for our adventure, behind her. Daniel was loading gear into their luxury SUV backpacks, a cooler, what looked like climbing equipment. Ethan and Lily were already buckled in the back seat, their excited faces visible through the window. "Just need to grab our bags," I replied, ushering her inside. "Frank's just finishing his coffee." In the kitchen, Frank sat rigid at the table, his untouched mug before him. He stood when Harper entered, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Beautiful day for a hike," he said, his voice hollow to my ears, though Harper seemed to notice nothing amiss. "Perfect," she agreed. "The forecast says clear all day. We should have amazing views from the summit." If we lived to see them, I thought. Daniel appeared in the doorway, all enthusiastic energy. "Mom, Dad, today's going to be great. I've mapped out the perfect trail, challenging enough to be interesting, but not too difficult." His performance was flawless, the devoted son planning a special outing for his aging parents. Had he rehearsed in front of a mirror, practiced his expressions, his tone of voice? "Sounds wonderful," I managed to say, picking up my backpack. "We're looking forward to it." Frank discreetly patted his pocket, where I knew his phone was hidden, already recording. He grabbed our water bottles from the counter and led the way outside. The children's excitement was genuine and contagious. Ethan, at 9, bounced in his seat as we approached, while 6-year-old Lily clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Grandma, Grandpa," they chorused as we approached the vehicle. "We're going to the mountains." For a moment, I forgot our grim purpose and simply savored their joy. I hugged each of them tightly, breathing in Lily's strawberry shampoo, feeling Ethan's strong little arms around my neck. "We brought snacks," Lily whispered conspiratorially. "Mom says we have to wait until we're on the trail, but I saved you a cookie." She slipped a slightly squashed chocolate chip cookie into my hand, and my heart broke a little more. How could her parents plot murder while she innocently saved cookies for her grandmother? The drive to the mountains took nearly 2 hours. Daniel drove carefully, obeying every speed limit sign, stopping completely at each stop sign. He was taking no chances with his precious cargo, not out of concern for our safety, but to ensure we reached our destination. Harper kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter, pointing out landmarks, sharing anecdotes about previous family trips. The children joined in, singing songs, playing travel games. It was a perfect family outing except for the murderous intent hidden beneath the surface. Frank sat beside me in the back seat, his hand finding mine between us. He squeezed gently, a silent reassurance. I squeezed back, drawing strength from his presence. As we climbed higher into the mountains, the scenery grew more spectacular. Towering pines lined the winding road, giving way occasionally to breathtaking vistas of valleys below. In different circumstances, I would have marveled at the beauty. Now, each curve in the road brought us closer to our confrontation with death. "Almost there," Daniel announced as he turned onto a gravel road. "The trailhead is just about 5 minutes up this way." I watched the back of his head, the familiar shape of his ears, so like Frank's, the dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. My son, my child, the boy I had nursed through fevers, taught to read, comforted after nightmares. Now a man planning to orphan his own children for money. Where had I gone wrong? What had I missed? These questions had haunted me since Frank's revelation, though I knew they had no satisfactory answers. Some darkness had always lived in Daniel, perhaps a shadow that had grown and festered over the years, nurtured by jealousy, greed, and the terrible secret he shared with his father. We arrived at a small clearing marked by a weathered wooden sign, Eagles Ridge Trail. Beyond it, a narrow path disappeared into dense forest. Few other cars were parked in the small lot, a worrying sign. Daniel and Harper wouldn't want witnesses to what they planned. "Here we are," Daniel said brightly, parking next to a red pickup truck. "Eagles Ridge has the best views in the state. Wait until you see the lookout point at the top." I met Frank's eyes briefly. The lookout point that would be where they planned to do it. A tragic accident. An elderly couple falling from a scenic overlook. So sad. So preventable. We exited the vehicle, the children immediately racing around the clearing, burning off energy after the long drive. Daniel and Harper unloaded the gear with practiced efficiency. "Ethan, Lily, come help carry your packs," Harper called, handing each child a small backpack. "Remember what we discussed. You're responsible for your own water and snacks." The children dutifully donned their packs, Ethan helping his sister adjust her straps. They looked so innocent, so normal. Did they have any idea what their parents were planning? Of course not. They were just excited for a day in the mountains with their family. Daniel approached with our backpacks heavier than the ones we'd packed ourselves. "I added some extra water and trail mix," he explained, "and a first aid kit, just in case. Or perhaps to make our bodies heavier, to ensure we fell faster, hit harder." "Thank you, son," Frank said, his voice steady as he accepted the pack. Always prepared, Daniel beamed at the praise, like he had as a child whenever Frank acknowledged his efforts. The need for his father's approval still drove him, even now, even as he planned Frank's murder. Harper gathered us together at the trailhead, pulling out her expensive camera. "Let's get a picture before we start," she suggested. To commemorate the day, we arranged ourselves in front of the sign, Frank and I in the center, Daniel and Harper on either side, the children kneeling in front, a perfect family portrait. "Smile," Harper called, setting the timer and rushing to join us. I forced my lips into a smile, wondering if this photo would later be shown at our funeral, the last picture taken of the happy couple before their tragic accident. Would people notice the tension in our posture, the fear in our eyes, or would they see only what they expected to see, a family enjoying a day together? The camera flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. for evidence. "All right, let's hit the trail," Daniel said, consulting a map he pulled from his pocket. "It's about 3 miles to the lookout point, mostly uphill but not too steep. We should take it slow, no rush." No rush, indeed. They had all day to implement their plan. We set off single file, Harper leading the way with Lily, then Ethan, followed by me and Frank. Daniel brought up the rear, supposedly to make sure no one falls behind, but more likely to keep us in his sight at all times. The trail was beautiful, winding through old-growth forest. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds called from the branches overhead, and occasionally small creatures rustled in the underbrush. In another life, I would have stopped to identify wildflowers, to point out interesting fungi to the children, to breathe deeply of the pine-scented air. Instead, every step filled me with dread, every bend in the trail bringing us closer to the confrontation I knew was coming. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a small clearing with fallen logs arranged as seating. Harper suggested a rest break, distributing water bottles and granola bars. "How are you holding up, Mom?" Daniel asked, his concern appearing genuine. "Not too tired. I'm fine," I assured him, taking a small sip of water. "It's a lovely trail. Dad, you okay?" Daniel turned to Frank, who was breathing a bit heavily. "Just not as young as I used to be," Frank replied with a forced chuckle. "But I'm enjoying the hike." I watched Daniel assess his father's condition, calculating, would Frank's apparent fatigue accelerate their plans, or would they stick to the original location? The lookout point with its convenient cliff. The children were full of energy, exploring the clearing, collecting pine cones and interesting rocks. Lily brought me a small purple wildflower. "For you, Grandma," she said, placing it carefully in my hand. "Because purple is your favorite." I hugged her close, breathing in her sweet scent. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful." How could her parents rob her of her grandparents? How could they live with themselves, knowing the trauma they were about to inflict on their own children after the break? We continued upward. The trail grew steeper, the forest thinner as we gained elevation. Glimpses of the valley below appeared between trees, spectacular vistas that would normally have had me reaching for my camera. "Not much further," Harper called back to us. "Maybe another half-mile to the lookout." Frank took my hand, squeezing it tightly. This was it. We were approaching the location Daniel and Harper had chosen for our accident. I felt Frank's phone press against my palm as he discreetly passed it to me. I slipped it into my pocket. Understanding his intent, if we were separated, we'd both have evidence. The trail curved sharply to the right, and suddenly the forest opened up. Before us stood a rocky outcropping that jutted over the Valley Eagle's Ridge, the lookout point Daniel had described. The view was breathtaking, mountains stretching to the horizon, a river winding like a silver ribbon through the valley floor, forests and meadows creating a patchwork of greens and golds. It would have been a beautiful last sight. "We made it," Daniel exclaimed, dropping his pack on a flat rock. "What do you think worth the climb?" "It's spectacular," I admitted, moving cautiously toward the edge. The drop was at least 90 feet, with jagged rocks below. A fall from here would certainly be fatal. Harper was already setting up her camera on a tripod, directing Ethan and Lily to stand near the edge but not too close for photos. They posed obediently, their small forms silhouetted against the vast landscape. "Frank, Amanda, let's get some pictures of you two together," Harper suggested after finishing with the children. "Stand over there, with the valley behind you." She pointed to a spot dangerously close to the cliff edge. Frank and I exchanged glances but moved carefully to the indicated position. I felt the weight of the phone in my pocket, recording everything. "Perfect," Harper exclaimed, snapping several photos. "Now, could you move back a bit? I want to capture more of the view." One step back would put us right at the edge of the cliff. This was it, the moment they had planned. Frank's hand tightened around mine. "I think we're good right here," he said firmly. "The view is spectacular enough from this spot." I saw frustration flash across Harper's face, quickly masked by a smile. "Just a tiny bit back," she coaxed. "The composition would be so much better." Daniel approached from the side, his movements casual but purposeful. "Here, Dad, Let me show you the best spot for photos. He positioned himself behind us, ready to push. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my teacher's instincts taking over. For 30 years, I'd managed classrooms of children, handled parent confrontations, diffused potentially violent situations. I wouldn't go quietly to my death. Daniel, I said sharply, turning to face him directly. We know what you're planning. His face registered shock, then confusion, then a calculated innocence. What are you talking about, Mom? We know about Andrew, Frank said, his voice steady despite the tremor I felt in his hand. I saw you that night. I know you pushed him into the gorge. Daniel's face drained of color. Behind him, Harper froze, the camera forgotten in her hands. Dad, you're not making sense, Daniel said, but his voice had lost its confident tone. Andrew fell. It was an accident. No, it wasn't, I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. And this wouldn't be an accident either. We know about the life insurance policies. We know about your debts. We know everything. Daniel? For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the wind through the pines and Ethan and Lily's distant voices as they explored a nearby cluster of rocks, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding. Then Daniel's expression changed, the mask of the devoted son falling away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. You don't know anything, he said, his voice lower, harder. You're just a couple of confused old people. He took a step toward us. Frank immediately pushed me behind him, protecting me as he always had. We have evidence, Frank said. Documents, recordings. If anything happens to us, it all goes to the police. Harper moved to Daniel's side, her elegant facade similarly discarded. They're bluffing, she said dismissively. They don't have anything. Are you willing to take that chance? I asked, looking directly at her. Are you ready to spend the rest of your life in prison to never see your children grow up? At the mention of the children, I saw a flicker of doubt cross Harper's face. She glanced toward Ethan and Lily, then back at us. They're right here, I pressed my advantage. Your children, our grandchildren, what do you think will happen to them if you're convicted of murder? Shut up, Daniel hissed, his composure cracking. Just shut up and listen. This can still work. One little push, and all your problems are solved. You're old. You've lived your lives. We need this money. To solve problems you created, Frank countered. Problems that started 25 years ago when you killed your brother over money. Daniel's face contorted with rage. He was going to ruin everything. Always the perfect son. Always Dad's favorite. He found out about the money I took and threatened to tell you both. What was I supposed to do? The admission hung in the air between us, crystal clear and damning. I felt a strange calm settle over me. We had our confession. The phone in my pocket was capturing every word. Daniel, I said softly, it's over. You can't kill us and get away with it. Too many people know. Liar, he spat. No one knows anything. Betty knows, I countered. She has letters from us explaining everything. George Roberts knows. He has copies of all the documents proving your financial fraud. Harper grabbed Daniel's arm. We need to think, she urged. If what they're saying is true... It's not true, Daniel shouted, making Ethan and Lily look up in alarm from their rock exploration. They're making it up to confuse us. But doubt had crept into his voice. The perfect plan was unraveling. I took a chance, moving toward the children. Ethan, Lily, come here, please, I called, keeping my voice steady and normal. It's time for lunch. The children obediently trotted over, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Is everything okay? Ethan asked, looking between his parents and us. Dad, why are you yelling? Daniel struggled to compose himself. Everything's fine, buddy. Just a little disagreement about which trail to take next. I positioned myself between the children and their parents, a protective instinct taking over. Daniel, Harper, we're going back down now, I said firmly. All of us, together. And when we get home, we're going to have a very long conversation about what happens next. Nothing's going to happen, Daniel snarled, but his confidence was faltering. Something already has, Frank replied. You've confessed to killing Andrew. It's recorded. It's over, son. Daniel lunged forward suddenly, grabbing for Frank's pockets. Where is it? Where's the recording? Frank dodged backward, nearly losing his balance at the edge of the cliff. My heart stopped for a moment, then restarted with a painful thud when he steadied himself. Daniel, stop! Harper cried, genuine alarm in her voice. The children are watching. Indeed, Ethan and Lily were staring wide-eyed at their father, fear and confusion on their young faces. Daddy, Lily's trembling voice broke through the tension. Why are you trying to hurt Grandpa? The simple question seemed to penetrate Daniel's rage. He looked at his daughter, then at his son, then back at Frank and me. For a brief moment, I saw the child he had once been uncertain, seeking approval, desperate to belong. Then his expression hardened again. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot, but the threat had lost its power. With the children present and the element of surprise gone, their plan had failed. Daniel might have been willing to murder his parents, but even he drew the line at traumatizing his children by committing the act in front of them. Let's go, Harper said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. We'll deal with this later. Daniel hesitated, looking from us to the cliff edge and back again, clearly calculating whether he could still salvage his plan. The children. Daniel, I reminded him gently. Think of your children. With a last venomous look, he turned away, gathering his pack. Fine, we're leaving, but this conversation isn't finished. As we prepared to descend, I felt no relief, only a grim determination to see this through to the end. We had survived the immediate threat, but the danger was far from over. Daniel and Harper were cornered now, their desperation making them even more unpredictable. The journey back down the mountain would be as perilous as the climb up, in ways that had nothing to do with the terrain. The descent began in tense silence. Harper led the way again, but her earlier cheerful commentary had vanished. Daniel insisted that Ethan and Lily walk with their mother, while he positioned himself directly behind Frank and me, monitoring us. I suspected, to ensure we didn't try to contact anyone. The beautiful forest trail now felt ominous, each shadow potentially harboring new danger. I kept my hand in my pocket, fingers wrapped around Frank's phone, our only tangible evidence of Daniel's confession. About a half-mile from the lookout point, the trail forked. The main path continued downward toward the parking area, while a smaller, less defined trail branched off to the right. This way, Daniel said abruptly, pointing to the smaller path. There's something I want to show you. That's not the way back to the car, Frank objected, standing his ground. It's a shortcut, Daniel insisted. Goes down to Falcon's View. It's even more spectacular than Eagle's Ridge. Another cliff, another opportunity. My blood ran cold. We're tired, I said firmly. We want to go back to the car. Daniel's expression darkened. It wasn't a suggestion. What about the children? I countered. They're getting tired too. Harper will take them back to the car, Daniel replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. You, Dad, and I are going to have a private conversation. Harper glanced back, understanding passing between her and Daniel. Come on, kids, she said with false brightness. Let's go get some ice cream from that shop we saw on the drive up. Grandma and Grandpa will join us later. I want to stay with Grandma, Lily protested, reaching for my hand. Not now, Lily, Harper said sharply. Come with me, now. The little girl's face crumpled at her mother's tone, but she obeyed, casting a confused look back at me as Harper led her and Ethan down the main trail. Once they were out of sight, Daniel's demeanor changed completely. Gone was any pretense of the loving son. His face hardened. His posture became threatening. Now, he said, gesturing toward the smaller trail. We're going to talk about what happens next. We're not going anywhere with you, Frank stated flatly. Not after what you've admitted. Daniel laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the trees. You don't have a choice. Either you come with me voluntarily, or I'll make you. And trust me, you don't want me to make you. I felt Frank tense beside me, preparing to defend us if necessary. At 60, he was still strong from decades of carpentry, but Daniel was 30 years younger and fueled by desperate rage. Daniel, I said, trying a different approach. Whatever financial troubles you're in, we can help you. There are other solutions besides this. It's too late for that, he snapped. Way too late. You know what I did to Andrew. You have evidence. That recording. He gestured to my pocket where I'd slipped the phone. You've ruined everything. You ruined everything 25 years ago when you pushed your brother off a cliff, Frank said quietly. Everything since then has just been the consequences catching up to you. Daniel's face contorted with rage. Always Andrew, even now, when he's been dead for decades. It's still all about him. The raw pain in his voice startled me. This wasn't just about money, it was about a lifetime of perceived rejection, of feeling second best, of toxic jealousy that had festered for decades. That's not true, I protested. We loved you both equally. Liar, Daniel shouted, his control slipping. Dad spent every weekend in the workshop with Andrew. Andrew has a natural talent, he'd say. Andrew understands the wood. I was just the tag-along, the afterthought. Frank paled at his son's words. Daniel, I never meant to make you feel that way. Save it, Daniel snarled. I don't need your apologies now. What I need is for you both to come with me to Falcon's View and finish what we started. He took a threatening step forward, and Frank instinctively moved in front of me again. We're not going anywhere except back down to the parking lot, Frank insisted. This ends now. Daniel's hand moved to his backpack, unzipping a side pocket. When it emerged, he was holding a hunting knife, one I recognized from our own kitchen. I said, we're going to Falcon's View. His voice was deadly calm now. Or I use this. Your choice. Frank stood his ground. You'd add 2 more murders to your conscience. Haven't you done enough damage? Conscience? Daniel laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from you. Dad, you've been covering up a murder for 25 years. You're as guilty as I am. The truth of his words hit Frank hard. I could see it in the slump of his shoulders. He had carried the weight of his complicity for decades, and now it was being thrown in his face by the very person he'd protected. You're right, Frank admitted quietly. I made a terrible mistake that night. I should have gone to the police immediately. I should have made you face the consequences of what you did. Maybe then, you would have had a chance to become a better man. For just a moment, something flickered across Daniel's face, regret, perhaps, or a glimmer of the boy he had once been, before murder and lies had consumed him, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Too late for that now, he said coldly. Way too late. Now move. He gestured with the knife toward the smaller trail. Frank and I exchanged glances, silently communicating as only couples who have spent 40 years together can do. We had to play for time, to find an opportunity to escape or call for help. Reluctantly, we started down the narrower trail, Daniel close behind us, knife at the ready. The path was overgrown and treacherous, with loose rocks that shifted under our feet. It wound around the mountain rather than directly down, and I soon realized we were indeed heading toward another overlook, one even more isolated than Eagle's Ridge. Daniel, I tried again. Think about what you're doing. Think about Ethan and Lily. I am thinking about them, he retorted. I'm thinking about the future they'll have if I go to prison for Andrew's murder. I'm thinking about the shame they'll live with. I'm doing this for them. They'll live with even more shame if you kill us, I pointed out. And they'll grow up without their parents. Is that what you want for them? Shut up, he snapped, but I could tell the words had hit home. Just keep walking. The trail narrowed further, hugging the mountainside with a steep drop to our right. One misstep would send us tumbling down the rocky slope, perhaps not fatal, but certainly disabling. Daniel could claim we had wandered off the main trail and had an accident. The perfect cover story. We walked in tense silence for another 10 minutes before the trail opened onto a small clearing. Ahead, a rocky outcropping jutted over the valley Falcon's View. Presumably, like Eagle's Ridge, it offered a fatal drop to the rocks below. Stop there, Daniel commanded as we reached the center of the clearing. Turn around, we obeyed, facing our son and his knife. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing, the beautiful day a stark contrast to the ugly scene unfolding. Give me the phone, Daniel demanded, holding out his free hand. I hesitated. clutching the device in my pocket. It contained our only evidence of his confession. "Now!" he shouted, brandishing the knife. Slowly, I pulled out Frank's phone, but instead of handing it over, I pressed the emergency call button on the side, a feature Frank had shown me years ago. With the screen still locked, it would silently dial 911. "Here," I said, offering the phone to Daniel. He snatched it, immediately checking to see if it was recording. When he saw the locked screen, he looked momentarily confused. "Unlock it," he demanded, shoving it back at me. I took the phone, pretending to enter the passcode while actually pressing random numbers, ensuring the emergency call remained connected. "It's not working," I said. "Maybe the battery died." Daniel growled in frustration and grabbed the phone back, shoving it into his own pocket. "Doesn't matter. We'll destroy it afterward." "Daniel," Frank said quietly, "this isn't going to solve your problems, even if you kill us. The evidence still exists. Betty has the letters. George has the documents. We'll deal with them too," Daniel said, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "And then who?" I asked. "How many people will you have to silence? It never ends." "Daniel, the truth always comes out eventually." Daniel paced the clearing, knife still in hand, clearly agitated. The careful plan was unraveling, and he wasn't sure how to proceed. "Maybe we can make a deal," he finally said. "You destroy all the evidence, forget what you know about Andrew, and we all go back to normal." "Normal?" Frank echoed incredulously. "There's no going back to normal. Not after what you've admitted. Not after you tried to kill us." "Then what do you want?" Daniel shouted, his composure cracking. "Prison. You want me in prison, your own son." "I want justice for Andrew," Frank replied steadily. "And I want you to get help. Daniel, real help." Daniel laughed bitterly. "There's no help for what I've done. And there's no way out of this for any of us. Don't you see? It has to end here. Today." He moved toward the cliff edge, gesturing with the knife for us to follow. "Over there. Now." We remained rooted in place. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "We're not going to let you kill us." His face contorted with rage. "You don't have a choice." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm roughly and dragging me toward the edge. Frank immediately intervened, grappling with Daniel despite the knife. "Run, Amanda," Frank shouted as he struggled with our son. "Get help." I hesitated, unwilling to leave Frank facing Daniel alone. That moment of indecision proved costly. Daniel broke free from Frank's grip and slashed wildly with the knife, catching Frank across the forearm. Blood immediately soaked through his shirt sleeve. "Frank!" I screamed, rushing to his side. Daniel used the distraction to grab me, yanking me toward the cliff edge with surprising strength. I fought back, drawing on reserves I didn't know I had, kicking and clawing as he dragged me. Despite his injury, Frank tackled Daniel from behind. All three of us tumbled to the ground dangerously close to the edge, a tangle of limbs and desperate struggle. The knife skittered away across the rocky ground. "Stop fighting!" Daniel shouted, his face red with exertion. "It's over. It's all over." In the chaos of the struggle, I heard a sound that froze my blood, the cracking of rock beneath us. The edge of the cliff, weakened by erosion, was giving way. "Move back!" I screamed. "The edge is breaking." But it was too late. With a sickening lurch, the ground beneath us collapsed. The world tilted, then disappeared as we fell, locked together in a deadly embrace, screaming as the air whistled around us and the rocky ground approached at breakneck speed. The impact was brutal. I heard the horrible sound of bones cracking, the sound of my own body shattering against the rocks. The pain was indescribable, but even more terrible was the taste of blood in my mouth and the certainty that this time Daniel had won. This time, there would be no witnesses to tell the truth. But then I heard Frank's voice, weak but clear. "Amanda, don't move. Play dead." And I realized something incredible. I was still alive. The pain was so intense I thought I would lose consciousness. Every fiber of my body screamed in agony. I felt blood running down my face and something wet and sticky soaking my clothes. But Frank's voice echoed in my ears like a divine command: "Play dead." With a willpower I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling even my breathing so it would be imperceptible. A few feet away, I could hear the moans of pain from Daniel. He had survived the fall, too, but from his groans, he seemed to be in worse condition than we were. "Harper," I heard my son's broken voice call out. "Harper, are you there?" There was no response. In the confusion, I hadn't realized Harper wasn't with us. Of course, she had taken the children back to the car. Daniel was alone with us. His concern for his wife made my stomach churn. This man, who had murdered his own brother and had tried to kill us, was still capable of feeling love for someone. The contradiction was almost incomprehensible. I heard movement, as if Daniel were crawling toward us. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid he would hear it. "Dad!" Daniel's voice was closer now, uncertain. "Mom?" I kept my eyes slightly open but unfocused, my body completely limp. I could see Daniel's blurry form hovering over Frank, checking for signs of life. "Dead," he muttered, his voice a mixture of shock and something that sounded disturbingly like satisfaction. He moved to me next, his face coming into focus as he leaned close. I could smell his aftershave, the same brand Frank used, a detail that now seemed perversely wrong. "Mom's gone too," he said to himself, his voice steadier. "It worked, just not the way I planned." His admission filled me with a strange hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe we would have a chance. I heard him fumbling with something Frank's phone. I realized he was destroying the evidence. "Damn it," Daniel cursed. "Password protected. Doesn't matter. The fall should have destroyed it anyway." He tossed the phone aside. I heard it clatter against the rocks a few feet away. Then came more movement as Daniel struggled to his feet. "Ah!" he cried out in pain. "My leg. Broken. Have to get back to the trail somehow. Have to find Harper." His footsteps, uneven and punctuated by gasps of pain, gradually receded. I waited until I could no longer hear him before I dared to whisper. "Frank, I'm here," came his faint reply. "Are you hurt badly?" I did a mental inventory of my body. My left arm was definitely broken. The pain was sharp and intense whenever I tried to move it. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it with a hammer, and there was definitely something wrong with my ribs. But I was alive, and that was more than I had hoped for. "Broken arm, maybe some ribs, and a head wound," I whispered. My leg is broken," he replied, his voice strained with pain. "And I think I have a few fractured ribs. The cut on my arm is still bleeding, but not too badly." "Can you reach your phone?" I asked. "I'll try." I heard Frank moving, followed by a groan of pain. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke again. "Got it. It's cracked, but still working. No signal down here, though." That was the most terrifying part of our situation. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a gorge, injured, and with no way to communicate with the outside world. If no one came looking for us, we would die here slowly from thirst, hunger, or our injuries. "Frank," I whispered, needing to know everything before it was too late. "Tell me the whole truth about the night Andrew died. Everything." My husband sighed deeply, as if he had been waiting for this moment for 25 years. "That night," he began in a trembling voice, "Andrew came to find me in the workshop. He was furious. He had papers in his hands, bank statements. He showed me evidence that Daniel had been stealing money from our accounts for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. Andrew had been investigating because he had noticed discrepancies in our savings. The physical pain mingled with the emotional pain as I listened to the truth that had been hidden for decades. Andrew wanted to confront Daniel that same night," Frank continued. "I tried to calm him down, to convince him to wait until the next day, but he was determined. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his younger brother was stealing from us." "And you followed him?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I followed him because I was afraid of what might happen. I knew Andrew's temper when he got angry, and I had noticed something strange about Daniel lately, a coldness that worried me. When I got to the gorge," Frank continued, "I found them screaming at each other. Andrew had the papers in his hand, waving them in Daniel's face. 'You're a thief!' he was yelling. 'You're stealing from our own parents.' Daniel denied everything. He said Andrew was crazy, that he was making things up. My heart raced as I imagined the scene. My two sons facing each other in the dark, one accusing the other of betrayal. What happened next, I asked, dreading the answer. Frank paused for a long time before continuing. Andrew told Daniel that if he didn't return the money and confess everything to us, he would tell us the truth himself. Daniel went berserk. He yelled that Andrew had always been the favorite, that he had always had everything easy, that it was time for things to change. Frank's voice broke. Then Daniel pushed Andrew. It wasn't an accident. Amanda? He pushed him with all his strength, deliberately. I saw Andrew trying to keep his balance, his arms flailing desperately, looking for something to grab onto. But it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds. Why did you never tell me the truth? Frank sighed deeply. Because when I got to where Daniel was, he was crying, trembling, telling me over and over that it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you, said he couldn't lose you too. But you knew it was a lie, I murmured. Yes, but he was my son. Amanda, my only surviving son. How could I turn him over to the police? How could I destroy what was left of our family? His justification hurt as much as my physical injuries. And the stolen money, I continued. Daniel promised me he would return it little by little. He swore it had been a bad decision, that he had been desperate, that it would never happen again. But he never returned a single penny. In fact, he kept stealing, and I kept quiet because every day that passed made me more of an accomplice to his crime. Just then, we heard voices in the distance. Someone was coming. Could be Daniel with help, Frank whispered urgently. Or it could be rescuers. If it's Daniel, we need to keep playing dead. He thinks we're already gone. I nodded slightly, closing my eyes again and forcing my body to go completely limp. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the sound of someone picking their way carefully down the rocky slope. "Hello?" called an unfamiliar male voice. "Anyone down there?" Frank and I remained silent, not knowing if this was help or a new threat. "Sheriff's Department," the voice called again. "We received an emergency call from this location." The 911 call. It had gone through after all. Relief flooded through me, but I remained motionless, waiting for confirmation that it was truly help arriving. "I can see them," another voice shouted. "Two people at the bottom of the gorge. They're not moving." The sound of boots on loose rock grew louder as the rescue team made their way down to us. I felt a gloved hand on my neck, checking for a pulse. "This one's alive," the rescuer called out. "Female, 60s, multiple injuries but stable pulse." Another rescuer was checking Frank. "This one too male, same age, also alive." Only then did I allow my eyes to open fully, blinking against the late afternoon sunlight. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" the first rescuer asked, a young woman with kind eyes visible above her mask. "My name is Paramedic Chen. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here." "My husband," I croaked, my voice barely audible. "Is he—" "He's alive," Chen assured me. "Injured, but alive. Can you tell me your name?" "Amanda Wilson," I whispered. "And that's my husband, Frank." "Mrs. Wilson, can you tell me what happened? How did you fall?" I gathered my strength, knowing this was my chance to tell the truth. "My son, Daniel, he tried to kill us. He pushed us." Chen's eyes widened with shock, but her professional demeanor didn't waver. "Your son pushed you intentionally." "Yes," I confirmed. "He killed my other son 25 years ago. Same way. We have proof. On my husband's phone." Chen looked to her colleague, concern evident in her expression. "I'm going to inform the sheriff," she said quietly. "This isn't just a rescue anymore." While they stabilized our injuries and prepared us for transport, I heard snippets of radio communication mentioning a possible attempted homicide and instructions to locate and detain Daniel Wilson. The process of being lifted out of the gorge was excruciating despite the pain medication they administered. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my broken body. But I endured it silently, focusing on a single thought: we had survived, and now the truth would finally come out. As they loaded me into the rescue helicopter, I caught a glimpse of Frank on a stretcher beside mine. His face was pale and drawn with pain, but when our eyes met, I saw determination there. We had made it this far. We would see justice done. The helicopter ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and noise. Paramedic Chen worked on me continuously, checking vital signs, adjusting an IV drip, speaking reassuring words that were largely drowned out by the roar of the rotors. I kept my eyes fixed on Frank whenever possible, drawing strength from his presence even as I worried about the severity of his injuries. Upon arrival at County Memorial Hospital, we were immediately separated, Frank taken to surgery for his leg and the deep knife wound on his arm, me to the trauma unit for assessment. I tried to protest, wanting to stay with my husband, but the medical team was insistent. "Mrs. Wilson, your husband is in good hands," a doctor assured me. "Right now, we need to take care of you. You have multiple fractures and a concussion." The next few hours passed in a fog of examinations, X-rays, and treatments. I learned that my left arm was broken in 2 places. 3 ribs were fractured, and I had a significant laceration on my scalp that required stitches. Painful, but not life-threatening. I would recover. When I was finally settled in a private room, a tall man in a sheriff's uniform appeared at my door, knocking gently on the frame. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Sheriff Robert Townsend. If you're up to it, I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened today." I nodded, wincing at the movement. "My husband, is he okay?" "Mr. Wilson is out of surgery. The doctors say he's stable but sedated. They had to set his leg and repair some torn blood vessels in his arm." Sheriff Townsend pulled a chair close to my bed. "Ma'am, Paramedic Chen reported that you claimed your son pushed you and your husband off that cliff deliberately. Is that correct?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "And it's not the first time he's done something like this. 25 years ago, he killed his brother Andrew the same way." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's a very serious accusation." "I know." I tried to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain. "And we have proof. Frank's phone. It recorded everything. Daniel's confession about Andrew, his plan to kill us." "We recovered a damaged phone at the scene," Townsend confirmed. "Our tech team is working on it now, but I need to hear your full statement." Over the next hour, I told Sheriff Townsend everything: Andrew's death, Frank's decades-long silence, Daniel's financial troubles, the mounting pressure for us to change our will, and finally, the events on the mountain that day. He listened without interruption, taking careful notes. "Where is my son now?" I asked when I had finished. "Did you find him?" Townsend's expression grew serious. "Your son was apprehended attempting to leave the state park in his vehicle. His wife and children were with him. He claimed that you and your husband had wandered off the main trail and he'd been unable to find you." "And Harper, what did she say?" Mrs. Wilson Lewis maintains that she left the hiking party early with the children and knows nothing about any confrontation or fall. She claims her husband returned to the car injured, saying he had fallen while searching for you both. I wasn't surprised. Harper would protect herself at all costs, even if it meant throwing Daniel under the bus. "The children?" I asked, concern overwhelming me. "What will happen to them?" "They're currently with social services," Townsend replied gently. "Your son is in custody, and given the circumstances, his wife is being questioned as a person of interest. Do you have any family who could take the children temporarily?" "My sister Betty," I said immediately. "Betty Carter. She lives in Millfield, about 30 miles from here. She and her husband Jim would take good care of them." The sheriff nodded. "We'll contact her. Now, Mrs. Wilson, there's one more thing. We need to formally reopen the investigation into your older son's death. That means exhuming his body, reviewing the original case files, everything. Are you prepared for that?" The thought of disturbing Andrew's rest after all these years sent a pang through my heart, but I knew it was necessary. "Yes," I said firmly. "It's time for the truth to come out, for Andrew to have justice." After the sheriff left, a nurse helped me to a reclining position that put less pressure on my ribs. I was exhausted but too wired to sleep, my mind spinning with the day's events and the implications of what was to come. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was a young nurse, her ID badge identifying her as Jessica Martinez. Mrs. Wilson, there's someone here who insists on seeing you. She says she's your sister. Relief washed over me. Betty, yes, please let her in. Betty burst into the room, her face etched with worry. She rushed to my bedside, carefully taking my uninjured hand in hers. Amanda, my God, when I got the call from the sheriff. Her eyes filled with tears as she took in my battered condition. They said Daniel did this, that he tried to kill you and Frank. I couldn't believe it. It's true, Betty, I said softly. All of it. And there's more. So much more. Over the next hour, I told her everything, including the truth about Andrew's death. Betty listened in horror, occasionally squeezing my hand or brushing away tears. I always thought there was something not right about that night, she finally said. The way Daniel acted afterward. Too calm, too controlled. And Frank, I noticed how he couldn't look people in the eye at the funeral. Why didn't you say something? I asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. Betty sighed. What would I have said? That I had a feeling, no evidence, just a sister's intuition. She shook her head. I should have pushed harder. Maybe if I had. It's not your fault, I assured her. We all missed the signs, or chose not to see them. What happens now? Betty asked. Sheriff Townsend says they're analyzing the recording from Frank's phone. If it's intact, it should provide the evidence they need to charge Daniel not just for our attempted murder, but for Andrew's death as well. Betty nodded grimly. And the children, Ethan and Lily. They're with social services for now. I gave them your name. Would you and Jim? Of course, she replied without hesitation. They shouldn't suffer for their parents' crimes. The next morning, Frank was wheeled into my room, his leg in a cast, his arm heavily bandaged. The sight of him pale but alive filled me with a joy I hadn't thought possible amidst all the horror. Mandy, he said, reaching for my hand as soon as the orderlies positioned his bed next to mine. Thank God you're okay. We both are, I said, fighting back tears. We made it, Frank. Sheriff Townsend arrived an hour later, his expression somber but satisfied. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I have some news. Our tech team recovered the recording from your phone. Mr. Wilson, it's intact, everything from the confrontation at Eagles Ridge to your fall at Falcon's View. It's damning evidence. Frank squeezed my hand. And Daniel? Your son has been formally charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, as well as assault with a deadly weapon. We're also reopening the investigation into Andrew Wilson's death in 1999. Given your testimony and the recording, we expect to file murder charges for that incident as well. And Harper? I asked. Townsend's expression hardened. Mrs. Wilson Lewis is currently maintaining that she knew nothing about any plan to harm you. However, we've obtained a warrant to search your son's home and business, and we've uncovered some interesting financial documents. It appears they took out substantial life insurance policies on both of you about 6 months ago. So she was involved, Frank said grimly. It certainly appears that way, the sheriff confirmed. We're continuing to build the case against her. Over the next few days, as Frank and I began the slow process of recovery, more details emerged. The search of Daniel and Harper's home had uncovered a hidden safe containing not only the insurance policies but also forged documents with our signatures, granting Daniel power of attorney over our affairs. There were also detailed notes about the mountain trail, with Falcon's View marked as an ideal location. Betty brought Ethan and Lily to visit us in the hospital. The children were confused and frightened, unable to understand why their parents weren't coming home. Where's Mommy and Daddy? Lily asked, her small face crumpling as she climbed carefully onto my bed, mindful of my injuries. They have to stay away for a while. Sweetheart, I said, struggling to find words that wouldn't traumatize her further. So you're going to stay with Aunt Betty and Uncle Jim. Did Daddy hurt you? Ethan asked suddenly, his 9-year-old perception cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Is that why he can't come home? Frank and I exchanged pained glances. How do you explain to a child that his father tried to murder his grandparents, Ethan? Frank said gently. Sometimes grown-ups do very wrong things, and then they have to face consequences. Your dad made some bad choices, and now he has to answer for them. But he loves us, Lily insisted, tears welling in her eyes. He reads me stories every night. My heart broke for these innocent children, caught in a nightmare not of their making. He does love you, I assured her, stroking her hair. That doesn't change. But he did something very wrong, and now he has to take responsibility for it. After the children left with Betty, Frank and I discussed their future. We should apply for custody, I said firmly. Once we're recovered, they need stability, love. Frank nodded, his eyes sad. Can we do it at our age after everything that's happened? We have to try, I replied. They're Andrew's niece and nephew. They're our family. We can't abandon them. 2 weeks after the fall, Frank and I were discharged from the hospital to continue our recovery at home. Betty and Jim had cleaned the house, stocked the refrigerator, and set up temporary beds on the ground floor so we wouldn't have to navigate stairs. The media had gotten hold of the story by then local news at first, then national outlets. Family betrayal son attempts to murder parents for insurance money, blared one headline. 25-year-old murder mystery solved, proclaimed another. Reporters camped outside our home until Sheriff Townsend intervened, establishing a perimeter and threatening trespassing charges. Still, the phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, book deals, movie rights. We declined them all, wanting only peace and time to heal. The preliminary hearing for Daniel was scheduled for a month after the incident. Harper had been charged as an accomplice, though her attorney was working on a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Daniel. The evidence against both was overwhelming: the recording, the financial documents, the life insurance policies, and now a mountain of forensic evidence from both the recent fall and the reopened investigation into Andrew's death. The day before the hearing, we received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Townsend arrived at our door with a small cardboard box. "We found this in a storage unit rented by your son," he explained, placing the box carefully on our coffee table. "I thought you should see it before the hearing." Inside was a collection of items that made my blood run cold: Andrew's wallet, his watch, a small notebook filled with his handwriting. Things that should have been with him when he died, that should have been returned to us afterward. "He kept trophies," Frank said, his voice hollow with horror. "All these years." Beneath these items was a folder containing what appeared to be Andrew's investigation into Daniel's theft bank statements, notes, calculations. The final piece of evidence my eldest son had gathered before confronting his brother that fateful night. "This confirms everything," Townsend said quietly. "Combined with the exhumation results showing Andrew suffered injuries inconsistent with an accidental fall, it's enough to ensure Daniel never sees freedom again." That night, Frank and I sat on our porch swing, the box of Andrew's belongings between us. I held his watch, running my thumb over the scratched face, remembering how proud he'd been when he bought it with his first paycheck from a summer job. "We failed him," I said softly. "We should have known. Should have seen what Daniel was capable of." Frank took my hand, his own still weak from his injuries. "We believed what we wanted to believe, what was easiest to believe. That's human nature. But it cost Andrew his life, and nearly cost us ours." We sat in silence as the stars appeared one by one overhead, the same stars Andrew had loved, the same stars that had witnessed both his murder and our narrow escape. "Tomorrow," Frank said eventually, "we face Daniel in court. Are you ready for that?" I considered the question carefully. Was I ready to look into the eyes of my son, knowing what he had done, knowing that he had killed his brother and tried to kill us, that he had lived a lie for 25 years? "Yes," I said finally. "For Andrew, for us, for the truth." The courthouse was imposing, a stone edifice with columns and broad steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Despite the August heat, I felt cold as Frank and I made our way inside, assisted by Betty and Jim. My arm was still in a cast, and Frank relied on a cane to walk, his broken leg not yet strong enough to bear his full weight. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread far beyond our small town, drawing media attention from across the state. As we made our way to the front row of seats reserved for us, I felt the weight of dozens of stares, some sympathetic, some merely curious. District Attorney Eleanor Phelps met us at the railing, A tall, imposing woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. She had been handling our case with remarkable sensitivity and determination. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," she greeted us quietly. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," Frank replied, easing himself into his seat with a grimace of pain. "Today is just the arraignment," Phelps reminded us. "Daniel and Harper will enter their pleas, and the judge will set bail, though in a case this serious. I expect both will be remanded to custody pending trial." I nodded, unable to speak as the door to the side of the courtroom opened. 2 court officers led Daniel in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit. My child shuffling into court as a criminal. He looked terrible. Thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallor that suggested he hadn't seen sunlight since his arrest. His leg was in a cast similar to Frank's, a reminder of the injuries he'd sustained in the fall. When he looked up and saw us, his expression shifted from resignation to something harder, colder. Harper was brought in separately, her usually perfect appearance diminished by the jail uniform and lack of makeup. Unlike Daniel, she didn't look at us, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor as she was guided to her place beside her attorney. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Harriman entered the courtroom. The Honorable Judge Michael Harriman presiding. The judge, a stern-faced man with wire-rimmed glasses, took his seat and surveyed the courtroom. "Be seated. We're here for the arraignment of Daniel Wilson and Harper Wilson Lewis on multiple charges. Let's proceed." The clerk read the charges. "Daniel Wilson, you are charged with 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of fraud, and 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Andrew Wilson in 1999. How do you plead?" Daniel's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, stood. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges." I felt Frank tense beside me. We had expected this, but hearing Daniel deny everything despite the overwhelming evidence was still jarring. "Harper Wilson Lewis," the clerk continued, "you are charged as an accomplice to 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. How do you plead?" Harper's attorney, a middle-aged woman with a severe bob, rose. "Your Honor, in light of ongoing negotiations with the district attorney's office, my client wishes to reserve her plea at this time." Judge Harriman nodded. "Very well. As to the matter of bail," District Attorney Phelps stood immediately. "Your Honor, the state strongly opposes bail for both defendants. They are charged with extremely serious crimes, including murder. Both have significant financial resources despite their apparent insolvency, and both represent flight risks. Moreover, they pose an ongoing danger to the victims, who are still recovering from their injuries." The defense attorneys made their arguments for reasonable bail, citing community ties and lack of prior criminal records, but Judge Harriman was unmoved. "Bail is denied for both defendants. They will be remanded to custody pending trial." He banged his gavel. "Next case." As Daniel was led away, he turned suddenly, his eyes finding mine. "Mom," he called out, his voice echoing in the now quiet courtroom. "Mom, don't do this. You know it wasn't like they're saying." I stared back at my son, this stranger who had killed his brother and tried to kill his parents, who was now asking for my help, my complicity. Once again, "Daniel," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me, "I don't know you anymore. I don't think I ever did." His face hardened, the mask of the dutiful son falling away completely. "You'll regret this," he hissed as the court officers pulled him toward the door. "Both of you. You think you know everything, but you don't. You have no idea." The threat hung in the air as he was led away, leaving a chill that had nothing to do with the courtroom's air conditioning. Outside, reporters swarmed around us, shouting questions, thrusting microphones in our faces. Betty and Jim formed a protective barrier, guiding us toward the car waiting at the curb. I kept my head down, ignoring the questions, the camera flashes, the chaos. Only when we were safely in the car did I allow myself to breathe. "He threatened us," I said quietly. "Right there in the courtroom." Frank took my hand. "He's desperate. He knows the evidence against him is overwhelming." "But what did he mean, you think you know everything, but you don't?" "He's trying to unsettle us," Betty said from the front seat. "Don't let him." But the words had found their mark. What else could there be? What other secrets was Daniel keeping in the weeks that followed? We learned that Harper had indeed struck a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she would testify against Daniel, providing details about the planning that had gone into the murder attempt and confirming that Daniel had confessed to her years ago about killing Andrew. The trial was scheduled for November, giving Frank and me more time to heal physically, if not emotionally. We focused on the things we could control our recovery, supporting Ethan and Lily, who visited every weekend from Betty and Jim's, and preparing for the legal battles ahead. We also began the process of applying for permanent custody of our grandchildren. The social worker assigned to their case, Marlene Jenkins, visited our home to assess its suitability. "The children speak very highly of you both," she told us as she toured the house, "especially Lily. She talks about your cookies and the stories you tell her." "They're good kids," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. "None of this is their fault." "No, it isn't," Jenkins agreed. "And that's precisely why finding them a stable, loving home is so important." She made a few notes on her tablet. "How are you planning to handle the physical demands of raising young children, given your recent injuries and your age?" It was a fair question, one we had discussed extensively. "We're healing well," I explained. "The doctors say we should regain most of our mobility, and we've made some modifications to the house-grabbed bars in the bathroom, a ramp at the back entrance. Betty and Jim have also agreed to help whenever needed." Jenkins nodded, continuing her assessment. By the end of the visit, she seemed cautiously positive about our application. "You clearly love these children," she said as she prepared to leave. "And they love you. That counts for a lot." As the trial date approached, District Attorney Phelps visited us at home to prepare us for our testimony. "This won't be easy," she warned. "Daniel's attorney will try to discredit you, to suggest you're confused, mistaken, or even lying. He'll use Frank's long silence about Andrew's death to paint him as an unreliable witness." "We know," I said, squeezing Frank's hand. "We're ready." Phelps nodded, satisfied. "The evidence is strong, the recording, the forensic findings, Harper's testimony, the items from the storage unit. But your testimony, as the victims and as Andrew's parents, will be crucial in helping the jury understand the human cost of these crimes." The night before the trial began, Frank and I sat on our porch swing, bundled against the November chill. The stars were hidden behind clouds, a fitting backdrop for the dark days ahead. "I keep thinking about what we'll say to Daniel's children when they're older," I said quietly. "How do we explain that their father killed their uncle and tried to kill us, that their mother was complicit in attempted murder?" Frank was silent for a long moment. "We tell them the truth," he finally replied, as gently as possible, but still the truth. "They deserve that much." I nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "And what about forgiveness? Can we ever forgive Daniel for what he's done?" "I don't know," Frank admitted. "I've been asking myself the same question. I failed him when he was young, failed to see his jealousy, his darkness. Failed to hold him accountable after Andrew died. Maybe if I had—" "We can't live in maybe," I interrupted gently. "We can only move forward, one day at a time." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day was an ordeal. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to the clinical description of Andrew's injuries, the forensic evidence proving his death was no accident, hearing Harper testify about Daniel's confession years ago, about their financial troubles, about the careful planning that went into the attempted murder at Falcon's View, watching the jury's faces as they listened to the recording from Frank's phone, hearing Daniel's damning words in his own voice. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand with a mix of dread and determination. I looked directly at Daniel as I swore to tell the truth, but he avoided my gaze, staring down at the table before him. District Attorney Phelps led me through my testimony gently but thoroughly. I described the increasing pressure from Daniel and Harper to sell our home and change our will, the conversation where Frank revealed the truth about Andrew's death, the fateful hike, and the confrontation at Falcon's View. "Mrs. Wilson," Phelps asked toward the end of my testimony, "in your opinion, Was your son trying to kill you and your husband that day? Yes, I replied without hesitation. Daniel was desperate. We knew his secret about Andrew. We had evidence, and we were a threat to him. He needed us gone, just like he needed Andrew gone 25 years ago. Daniel's attorney, Mr. Benton, rose for cross-examination. As Phelps had warned, he tried to paint me as confused, suggesting the fall had affected my memory or perception. He questioned why. If we truly believed Daniel had murdered Andrew, we had agreed to go hiking with him at all. Mrs. Wilson, he asked with feigned concern, isn't it possible that what happened at Falcon's View was simply a tragic accident during a family argument that, in the heat of the moment, all three of you lost your balance and fell? No, I replied firmly. Daniel had a knife. He dragged me toward the edge. Frank tried to stop him, and Daniel slashed his arm. This was no accident. By the time Frank took the stand the following day, the defense's strategy was clear attack his credibility based on his long silence about Andrew's death. Benton was merciless. Mr. Wilson, you admit that you witnessed your son Daniel supposedly push his brother to his death, yet you said nothing for 25 years. You became, by your own admission, an accomplice after the fact. Why should the jury believe your testimony now? Frank looked directly at Daniel before answering. Because I've been living with the consequences of my silence for 25 years. Because I've seen what that silence cost, not just Andrew's justice, but Daniel's soul. I failed both my sons that night, and I'll regret it until the day I die. But I'm telling the truth now, finally, because it's the only way to stop more tragedy. His raw honesty seemed to affect everyone in the courtroom, including some members of the jury, who I noticed wiping away tears. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 6 hours before reaching a verdict. As we gathered in the courtroom to hear their decision, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened now, the truth was out. Andrew would have justice, one way or another. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Andrew Wilson, we find the defendant, Daniel Wilson, guilty. Relief washed over me, so powerful I nearly collapsed. Frank's arm around my shoulders was the only thing keeping me upright. On the 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder of Frank and Amanda Wilson, we find the defendant, Daniel Wilson, guilty. One by one, the jury foreman read the verdicts for the remaining charges, guilty on all counts. Daniel stood impassively, showing no reaction as his fate was sealed. Judge Harriman scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, and Daniel was led away without looking at us once. Harper had already received her sentence as part of her plea deal, 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10, in exchange for her testimony against Daniel. When we returned to court for Daniel's sentencing, the atmosphere was somber. This time, Ethan and Lily were with us, having insisted on being present despite our reservations. At 9 and 6, they were young to witness such proceedings, but as Betty had argued, they deserve closure too. Judge Harriman allowed victim impact statements before pronouncing sentence. Frank went first, his voice steady as he described the loss of Andrew, the years of secret guilt, the betrayal by a son he had tried to protect. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, still mindful of my healing injuries, and faced the court. 25 years ago, I lost my firstborn son. I believed it was a tragic accident, and I grieved accordingly. Now I know it was murder committed by his own brother, my younger son, whom I continued to love and nurture, never suspecting the darkness within him. I paused, looking directly at Daniel for the first time since the trial began. He finally met my gaze, his expression unreadable. I've asked myself countless times where I went wrong as a mother, what signs I missed, what I could have done differently. I may never have those answers, but I do know this despite everything. I cannot stop loving the son I raised, even as I abhor the man he became. Tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them away, determined to finish. Daniel took everything from his brother Andrew's life, his future, his chance to fall in love, to have children, to grow old. And he nearly took everything from his father and me. But he failed. We survived. And now the truth has survived too. Today, I ask this court for justice not just for Andrew, not just for Frank and me, but for Ethan and Lily, innocent children who have lost both parents to greed and violence. They deserve to grow up in a world where actions have consequences, where truth prevails over lies, where love doesn't have to mean blind acceptance of evil. As I returned to my seat, I heard a small sound from Daniel, not quite a sob, but close. It was the first sign of emotion he had shown throughout the entire process. Judge Harriman's sentence was severe, but just life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for Andrew's murder, plus additional consecutive sentences for the attempted murders of Frank and me. Daniel would never again walk free. As he was led away for the last time, Daniel finally turned to face us. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not for what I did, I can't change that, but for what I took from you, from all of us." It wasn't the full admission of guilt or expression of remorse I might have hoped for, but it was something in acknowledgement, at least of the damage he had caused, outside the courthouse, away from the media frenzy. We gathered as a family, Frank and I, Betty and Jim, Ethan and Lily. The children were subdued, struggling to process what they had witnessed. "Is Daddy going to jail forever?" Lily asked, her small face serious. I knelt before her, ignoring the pain from my still healing ribs. "Yes, sweetheart, your daddy did some very bad things, and this is the consequence. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." Ethan, more perceptive than his years would suggest, asked the question that had been haunting all of us. "Are you and Grandpa going to be our parents now?" Frank joined me, kneeling despite his cast. "If that's what you want, and if the court agrees, yes, we would be honored to raise you both." "But we're old," I added honestly. "Much older than most parents. It won't always be easy." Ethan considered this seriously before responding. "That's okay. Old people know more stuff, and you tell better stories." Lily nodded her agreement, then threw her arms around my neck. "I want to live with you and Grandpa," she declared. "You make me feel safe." Over her small shoulder, I met Frank's eyes, seeing in them the same mix of grief and hope that I felt. We had lost so much: Andrew to death, Daniel to darkness, our sense of security and trust. But we had gained something too, the truth. Finally, after 25 years, and these children, these precious links to the future. 1 month later, the family court judge granted us permanent custody of Ethan and Lily. We moved them into our home, Andrew's old room for Ethan, the guest room transformed with pink paint and butterfly decals for Lily. Their presence filled the house with noise and activity, challenging our aging bodies but rejuvenating our spirits. Each night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she would ask for a story about Uncle Andrew when he was little. I would tell her about his kindness, his laughter, his dreams of reaching the stars. I wanted these children to know the uncle they had never met, to carry forward the best parts of our family's legacy rather than the tragedy that had nearly destroyed us. On the anniversary of Andrew's death, now understood in its true context, we visited his grave as a family. Frank had crafted a new headstone, one that read, "Andrew James Wilson, beloved son and brother, whose truth finally came to light." We placed wildflowers on the grave, Andrew's favorite, and stood together in a moment of silent remembrance. As we walked back to the car, Ethan slipped his hand into mine. "Grandma," he said thoughtfully, "do you think Uncle Andrew can see us from heaven? Do you think he knows we remember him?" I squeezed his small hand, finding comfort in his innocent wisdom. "Yes," I replied. "I believe he does, and I think he's watching over all of us." Frank put his arm around my shoulders, and Lily skipped ahead, chasing a butterfly across the cemetery grass. We were not the family I had imagined all those years ago, sitting on the porch swing with Frank and dreaming of our future. We were something different now, scarred but stronger, broken but rebuilt, bound together not just by blood, but by truth, by survival, by choice. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt something I had not expected to feel again: peace. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.